Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished loading the last box of donated clothes into his delivery truck. The summer heat in downtown Phoenix was brutal, and his volunteer shift at the community center was running longer than usual. As the director of a small nonprofit that helped homeless families, Marcus had seen it all, but nothing had prepared him for what would happen when he met the quiet woman who always sat in the back corner of the weekly community dinners. She appeared every Thursday evening, always alone, always dressed in the same faded blue dress that had seen better days. Her graying hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore worn-out sneakers that looked like they had walked 1,000 miles. The other volunteers had tried to engage her in conversation, but she usually just smiled politely and kept to herself. Marcus noticed she always waited until everyone else had been served before quietly getting in line for food. On this particular Thursday, Marcus was serving soup when she approached the counter. Her hands shook slightly as she held out her bowl, and he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Without thinking, he smiled warmly and said, "Here you go. Sweetheart, made sure to give you extra vegetables tonight." The woman looked up at him with surprise, and for just a moment, he saw something flash across her face that he couldn't quite identify. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't place. "You're very kind." As she walked away to find a seat, Marcus noticed something different about the way she carried herself. Despite her worn clothing and obvious hardships, there was something dignified about her posture, something that suggested a different life, a different story than what appeared on the surface. Later that evening, as Marcus was cleaning up, he overheard two regular volunteers talking. "Did you see Maria tonight?" one of them asked. "She looked even thinner than usual. I wonder what her story is. She's been coming here for months, but nobody really knows anything about her." Maria. So that was her name. Marcus made a mental note to try to learn more about her situation. Maybe there was additional help they could provide, resources she didn't know about, or programs that could assist her in getting back on her feet. The following week, Marcus arrived early to help set up for the community dinner. To his surprise, he found Maria already there, quietly folding napkins at one of the tables. She looked up when she saw him, offering that same polite smile. "You're here early tonight," Marcus said, approaching her table. "Are you helping out?" "I hope that's okay," Maria replied, her hands never stopping their careful folding. "I wanted to do something to help. You all do so much for people like me." Marcus pulled up a chair across from her. "Of course it's okay. We can always use an extra pair of hands. I'm Marcus. By the way, I don't think I properly introduced myself." "I know who you are," Maria said, glancing up at him briefly. "Everyone speaks very highly of you. They say you started this program yourself." "Well, not exactly myself," Marcus chuckled. "It takes a whole community to make something like this work. What about you, Maria? Have you lived in Phoenix long?" For a moment, Maria's hands stilled. She stared down at the napkin in her lap, and Marcus wondered if he had overstepped. Finally, she looked up at him, and he saw that flash in her eyes again. "I've been here about 8 months," she said carefully. "Before that, I lived in many places." Many places. Something in her tone told Marcus not to push further, at least not yet. Instead, he picked up some napkins and started helping her fold them. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Maria spoke again. "You called me sweetheart last week," she said, not looking up from her work. "No one has called me that in a very long time." "I hope that was okay," Marcus said, suddenly feeling awkward. "I guess it's just a habit. My grandmother always called everyone sweetheart. It was more than okay," Maria said. And when she smiled this time, it reached her eyes. "It reminded me of someone I used to know." As more volunteers arrived and the evening got busy, Marcus found himself stealing glances at Maria throughout the night. She moved efficiently, helping wherever needed, and he noticed that several of the regular attendees seemed to know her well. She listened patiently to an elderly man's stories about his late wife, helped a young mother manage her 3 small children, and even convinced a teenage boy to try the vegetables on his plate. When the evening wound down, Marcus offered to walk Maria to her car. But she shook her head. "I don't have a car," she said simply. "I walk." "Where do you live?" Marcus asked, concerned about her safety walking alone at night. "Not far," Maria replied, but she didn't offer specifics. "Thank you for letting me help tonight. It felt good to be useful again." There was something in the way she said "again" that stuck with Marcus as he drove home that night. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to Maria's story than met the eye. Over the next few weeks, Maria became a regular volunteer. She had a natural way with people, especially the children who came with their families. Marcus watched her one evening as she sat with a little girl who was crying because she had lost her favorite toy. Maria knelt down to the child's level and spoke to her in what sounded like Spanish, then French, then what might have been Italian. The little girl stopped crying and started giggling at something Maria had said. "How many languages do you speak?" Marcus asked her later, as they were stacking chairs. "A few," Maria said with that mysterious smile. "I've traveled quite a bit in my life." "For work?" Marcus pressed gently. Maria paused, a chair halfway to the stack. Marcus was beginning to understand that Maria guarded her privacy carefully, but his curiosity was growing stronger each week. She clearly had education and experience beyond what her current circumstances suggested. She could relate to people from all different backgrounds. She moved with a certain grace despite her worn clothing, and sometimes he caught glimpses of what seemed like very expensive watch peeking out from under her sleeve. One evening, as they were preparing for the dinner service, a well-dressed couple arrived, looking somewhat out of place among the usual crowd. The woman was elegantly dressed and carrying an expensive purse, while the man wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. They approached Marcus at the serving counter. "Excuse me," the woman said in a crisp accent. "We're looking for someone. A woman who might be staying at local shelters or using community services. We've been told this is a good place to start." Marcus immediately became protective. "I'm sorry, but I can't give out information about the people who use our services. Privacy is very important to us here." Of course," the man said quickly. "We understand completely. It's just that this person is very important to us, and we've been searching for months." The woman pulled out a photograph from her purse. "Her name is Maria Castellano. She's about 60 years old, average height, graying hair. Have you seen anyone matching this description?" Marcus glanced at the photo, and his heart nearly stopped. It was Maria, but not the Maria he knew. In the photograph, she was wearing an elegant black evening gown. Her hair was professionally styled, and she was standing next to a man in a tuxedo in what looked like a palace ballroom. She was smiling confidently at the camera, every inch the picture of sophisticated elegance. I'm not sure," Marcus managed to say, his mind racing. "Can you tell me why you're looking for her?" "Lug." The couple exchanged glances. "She's our employer," the woman explained. Or rather, she was. Dr. Maria Castellano is one of the most respected international humanitarian doctors in the world. She disappeared 8 months ago after completing a mission in Syria. Her family and colleagues have been desperately searching for her. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Dr. Maria Castellano. He had heard that name before, though he couldn't quite place where. "What kind of doctor?" he asked weakly. "She specializes in trauma surgery and emergency medicine in war zones," the man explained. "She's worked with Doctors Without Borders for over 20 years. She's saved thousands of lives in places like Bosnia, Afghanistan, Somalia, Syria. She was supposed to return to Geneva after her last mission, but she never arrived. Her family feared the worst." At that moment, Marcus heard a familiar voice behind him. "Hello, James." "Hello, Claire." He turned around to see Maria standing there, but she looked different somehow. Her posture was straighter, her voice was clearer and more confident, and despite her simple clothes, she suddenly looked every inch the accomplished professional the couple had described. The woman named Claire immediately burst into tears. "Dr. Castellano, thank God you're alive. We've been searching everywhere for you." James looked like he might faint with relief. "Doctor, your family has been beside themselves. The authorities thought you might have been kidnapped or worse." Maria looked at Marcus, and he saw an apology in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have told you." Free. Float. Flued. Marcus felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. "You're really a doctor? A famous doctor?" "Yes," Maria said simply. "I am." Claire stepped forward urgently. "Doctor, you need to come home. Your daughter has been organizing search parties across 3 continents. The medical board has been holding your position. Everyone has been so worried." But Maria shook her head slowly. "I can't go back, Claire. Not yet." "But why?" James asked, clearly confused. "What happened? Why did you disappear?" Maria was quiet for a long moment, looking around the community center at the families eating dinner, the volunteers cleaning up, the simple but important work happening there. When she spoke again, her voice was heavy with emotion. "I spent 20 years saving lives in the worst places on earth," she began. "I've operated on children in bombed-out hospitals, delivered babies in refugee camps, treated soldiers and civilians alike without asking questions about which side they were on. I've seen humanity at its worst and its best." She paused, and Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. "But after Syria, after what I saw there, what I lived through, I couldn't face going back to my comfortable life in Geneva. I couldn't sit in conference rooms and give presentations about the horrors I'd witnessed, while people in my own country, in every country, were struggling right outside our doors." Marcus finally found his voice. "So you came here?" "I came here," Maria confirmed. "I wanted to disappear, to be nobody special, to help people without the weight of expectations and accolades. I wanted to remember what it felt like to be useful in simple ways." "Fancies." Claire looked around the community center with new understanding. "You've been volunteering here all this time? And receiving services too," Maria admitted. "I gave away most of my savings before I left Geneva. I've been living in a shelter, learning what it's really like to need help, instead of always being the one giving it." Marcus stared at her, processing everything he had just learned. "You're telling me that you're one of the world's most famous humanitarian doctors, and you've been pretending to be homeless?" "Not pretending," Maria corrected gently. "I really was homeless. I really did need help. The only difference is that I chose it." James shook his head in amazement. "Doctor, with all due respect, your skills are needed in places where people are dying. How can you justify this?" Maria's eyes flashed with something Marcus had seen before, but couldn't identify until now. It was strength. The kind that came from years of making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. "People are dying here too, James," she said firmly. "Maybe not from shrapnel and bullets, but from poverty, from addiction, from hopelessness, from feeling invisible and forgotten. The woman who sits at table 3 every week is dying slowly from diabetes because she can't afford her medication. The man who always helps clear tables is a veteran who hasn't slept through the night in 2 years because of what he saw in Afghanistan. The teenage boy who barely eats is working 2 jobs to help support his family." She gestured around the room. "These people need help just as desperately as anyone I treated in a war zone. The difference is that they're not considered newsworthy." Marcus felt something shift inside him as he listened to her speak. This was the Maria he had gotten to know over the past months. But now he understood the depth of experience and wisdom behind her gentle manner with the community center guests. "So, what happens now?" he asked. Maria looked at him, then at James and Claire, then back around the room. "I don't know," she admitted. "I know I can't hide forever. I know there are people depending on me, people who need the work I do internationally, but I also know I can't go back to the way things were." Claire stepped forward carefully. "What if there was a way to do both? What if you could continue your international work, but also maintain your connection to grassroots community service?" "What do you mean?" Maria asked. "Your foundation," James explained. "The Maria Castellano Foundation for Emergency Medicine. It's been dormant since you disappeared, but it's still legally operational. What if we restructured it to include domestic humanitarian work alongside international missions? Marcus watched Maria's face as she considered this possibility. You mean, I could split my time? Spend part of the year working in crisis zones and part working in communities like this? More than that, Claire said excitedly. You could use your reputation and connections to bring attention and resources to domestic issues. Imagine what you could accomplish if you approached poverty and homelessness in America with the same systematic methodology you use in refugee camps. For the first time since James and Claire had arrived, Marcus saw Maria's face light up with genuine interest. It would require careful planning, she said slowly. And I would need to maintain my connections here, my relationships with the people I've been working with. She looked at Marcus. I would need partners who understand both worlds. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Are you asking me to help? I'm asking if you would consider it, Maria said. You've built something special here, Marcus. You understand how to serve people with dignity, how to provide help without taking away hope. Those are skills that are just as valuable in international humanitarian work as they are here. Over the next hour, as they sat in the empty community center after everyone else had gone home, Maria told Marcus stories from her 20 years of international service. She described performing surgery by candlelight in a bombed hospital in Sarajevo, delivering twins in a refugee camp in Somalia during a sandstorm, and teaching local medical staff in Afghanistan how to treat trauma injuries with limited supplies. But she also talked about the cost. The relationships she had sacrificed for her career. The family gatherings she had missed. The way she had gradually lost touch with normal, everyday life. She described feeling like she existed in a permanent state of emergency, always moving from one crisis to the next, without ever stopping to process what she had experienced. When I got back from Syria, she said quietly, I realized I didn't know who I was when I wasn't saving lives. In extreme circumstances, I had become addicted to the adrenaline, to feeling essential and irreplaceable, but I had forgotten how to be human. Marcus nodded slowly. And coming here helped you remember? Coming here taught me that every act of kindness matters, Maria replied. When you called me sweetheart that first night, it was the first time in months that someone had spoken to me like I was just a regular person who deserved simple courtesy. Not Dr. Castellano, the famous humanitarian, not a patient or a victim, just Maria. She smiled at the memory. It reminded me that the most important healing often happens in the smallest moments. As the weeks passed, Maria began the delicate process of rebuilding her old life while maintaining her new perspective. She returned to Geneva briefly to reassure her family and colleagues that she was safe, but she also insisted on maintaining her volunteer work at the community center. James and Claire worked with lawyers and administrators to restructure the foundation, creating a new model that would allow Maria to spend 6 months of each year working internationally and 6 months focusing on domestic issues. Marcus found himself drawn into these discussions, his practical experience with community-based programs proving invaluable in designing the new approach. The first test of their partnership came sooner than expected. A major earthquake hit a small country in Central America, and the international medical community was mobilizing emergency response teams. Maria was requested to lead a surgical team, but she hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted to Marcus as they discussed the request over coffee in the community center kitchen. What if I've lost my edge? What if I can't handle the pressure anymore? Marcus set down his coffee cup and looked at her seriously. Maria, in the past 3 months, I've watched you talk a suicidal teenager out of giving up on life, deliver a baby in the back of someone's car in our parking lot, and organize a medical clinic for undocumented immigrants who were too afraid to go to the hospital. If that's not handling pressure, I don't know what is. She laughed softly. That's different. That's just helping people. No, Marcus said firmly. That's exactly the same thing. The only difference is the setting. Maria decided to accept the mission, but with a new approach. Instead of going alone and burning herself out with impossible hours, she assembled a larger team that could rotate responsibilities. She also insisted on bringing some of the community-based practices she had learned at the center, focusing not just on emergency surgery but on training local medical staff and establishing sustainable systems. Marcus stayed in Phoenix to maintain the community center, but they video called every few days. Maria looked tired but not exhausted, focused but not obsessed. When she returned 6 weeks later, she was clearly energized by the work but also genuinely happy to be back. "I missed Thursday dinners," she told him as they prepared for the weekly community meal. "I missed Mrs. Rodriguez's stories about her grandchildren, and Tommy's terrible jokes." "And they missed you too," Marcus replied. "Mrs. Rodriguez asked me at least 10 times when you were coming back. I think she was worried you might disappear again." That evening, as Maria served soup to the familiar faces who had become like family to her, Marcus watched her interact with each person. She still called everyone sweetheart or honey or dear, but now he understood that it came from a place of deep professional experience, combined with genuine personal affection. When an 8-year-old boy complained that his stomach hurt, Maria didn't just comfort him. She expertly assessed his symptoms, determined he likely had early appendicitis, and calmly convinced his mother to take him to the emergency room immediately. When an elderly veteran mentioned that his war injuries were acting up, Maria discreetly examined his old wounds and gave him specific advice about managing chronic pain. But she did all of this without fanfare, without drawing attention to her qualifications, treating each person simply as someone who deserved care and respect. After the meal, as they were cleaning up, Marcus broached a subject they had been dancing around for weeks. "Maria, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When you first came here, when you were living in the shelter and really struggling, was any of that an act? Or were you genuinely in crisis?" Maria paused in wiping down a table, considering the question carefully. "Both," she said finally. "I chose to give up my old life, my money, my comfortable apartment. But once I made that choice, the struggle was absolutely real. I really didn't know where my next meal was coming from. I really was sleeping on a cot in a room with 12 other women. I really was scared and overwhelmed and exhausted." She sat down heavily in one of the plastic chairs. "I think that's what I needed, actually. I needed to remember what it felt like to be vulnerable, to need help, to not be the one with all the answers." "And now?" Marcus asked, sitting across from her. "Now I feel like I can be both," Maria said. "I can be Dr. Maria Castellano when that's what's needed, and I can just be Maria the volunteer when that's what's needed. For the first time in 20 years, I feel like a whole person, instead of just a professional identity." 6 months later, Marcus found himself on a plane to South Sudan, where Maria was leading a medical mission in a refugee camp. He had never traveled internationally before, had never seen poverty and displacement on such a massive scale. But as he watched Maria work, seamlessly switching between complex surgery and teaching basic hygiene to camp residents, between treating gunshot wounds and organizing vaccination programs, he began to understand the full scope of her abilities. More importantly, he saw how the skills and perspective she had gained from their work in Phoenix had changed her approach to international humanitarian work. She spent time really listening to the refugees, learning their names and their stories. She trained local staff not just in medical procedures but in treating patients with dignity and respect. She insisted on including mental health support and community-building activities alongside the emergency medical care. "You've changed how I see this work," she told him one evening as they sat outside the medical tent, watching children play soccer with a ball made of rolled-up plastic bags. "Before, I was so focused on the emergency, on saving as many lives as possible as quickly as possible, that I sometimes forgot these were people with full, complex lives, not just medical cases." Marcus watched a little girl chase after the makeshift ball, laughing despite everything she had probably been through. "I think you taught me something too," he said. "What's that?" "That helping people isn't about the scale of the crisis or how dramatic the circumstances are. It's about seeing each person as valuable and doing whatever you can with whatever resources you have." When they returned to Phoenix, they began implementing what they had learned in both directions. The community center started offering more comprehensive services, including basic medical care and mental health support. Meanwhile, Maria's international work became more community-centered, focusing on sustainable, dignified solutions rather than just emergency response. One Thursday evening, About a year after James and Claire had first appeared looking for the missing Dr. Castellano, Marcus was serving soup when a new face appeared in line. She was a young woman, probably in her 20s, with the worn clothing and tired eyes that Marcus had learned to recognize. "Here you go, sweetheart," he said, ladling soup into her bowl. "First time here?" The young woman nodded. "Someone told me this was a good place to get a meal, and maybe some help finding work." "It absolutely is," Marcus assured her. "Make sure you talk to Maria over there when you're done eating. She's good at connecting people with resources." As the young woman walked away, Marcus smiled to himself. He still didn't know her story. Had no idea what circumstances had brought her to their community center. But he knew that whatever she was facing, she would be treated with respect and dignity here, and if she was lucky, she might even find what Maria had found. A place where she could be both vulnerable enough to receive help and strong enough to help others. Later that evening, as they were stacking chairs and wiping down tables, Maria approached him with a familiar smile. "You called her sweetheart," she observed. "Is that okay?" Marcus asked, echoing their conversation from over a year ago. "It's more than okay," Maria replied. "It's exactly what she needed to hear." As they finished cleaning up and prepared to lock up the community center for another week, Marcus reflected on everything that had changed since that first evening, when he had called a tired, hungry woman sweetheart, without knowing he was speaking to one of the world's most accomplished humanitarian doctors. He had learned that people are rarely who they first appear to be. That everyone has a story more complex than what shows on the surface, and that sometimes the most profound help comes not from dramatic gestures, but from simple human kindness, consistently applied. Most importantly, he had learned that calling someone sweetheart, really meaning it, really seeing them as worthy of affection and respect regardless of their circumstances, might be one of the most radical acts of service possible in a world that often treats people as invisible. As Maria locked the door behind them, and they walked out into the warm Phoenix evening, Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring new faces, new stories, new opportunities to serve. And whether those faces belonged to local families struggling to make ends meet, or international refugees fleeing war zones, they would be greeted with the same simple respect: a warm meal, a listening ear, and perhaps, if they were lucky, someone who would look them in the eye and call them sweetheart, meaning every word of it.